for the podcasts. If this is working for you, let us know in the chat room. This is the Tattoo Now show. We're tuned in right after the Tattoo Now Business Roundtable. So we've been chatting with Chris a little bit. This is Chris Dingwell. You could go to anywhere on the internet and do a search for Chris Dingwell. He's been tattooing for over 30 years and or over 3 decades. And yeah, he has owned a studio on and off for years. So he's had a lot of great insights. And but we're here to talk about his paintings, about his tattoos. He'll be coming to the Paradise Tattoo Gathering. And if you have any questions, then let us know. Also, like I said, if it's working and whatnot, let us know in the chat room here. I want to thank Guy Aitchison and the Reinventing the Tattoo Network. And I'll probably end up doing a proper introduction when we put it out on the podcast there. So Chris, thanks for tuning in. This is awesome. It's always a real pleasure to check out your paintings. I mean, your tattoos are great. The paintings are right on point, and well, thanks again for hopping on. And why don't you let us know a little bit about your current projects there in Portland, Maine, and then I'm going to check to make sure that this is working.
Well, my current projects are really pretty simple. I'm trying to paint as much as I can, which is it's hard to find time for that. And but mostly I'm tattooing nonstop, lots and lots and lots of different sorts of projects. And it's great. It keeps me afloat.
Awesome. Tattooing's pretty nuts. Now, how much do you end up splitting your time between tattooing and painting? Because you're obviously doing a lot of both.
Well, I think it's funny, like the as the guy said before, that said I was really prolific and so forth and so on. I never feel like I get enough painting done. I feel like that's pretty rare for me. I'm definitely tattooing full time, a solid 40 hours a week, if not longer than that. It's hard with parenting and so forth. I'm pretty much a single parent at this point, with a teenage daughter. That's a whole situation. That's my biggest full-time job. Tattooing's really my second biggest full-time job.
Send all this information, and I'm gonna send Seth so you can look at the cars.
Oh, and then to be clear, so are you billing for like a good 30-40 hours a week? Or are you like at the shop 40 hours a week?
Off the top of my head, I don't even really know. But yeah, I'm probably I tend to do, when I tattoo, I tend to work primarily in longer sessions. I do full days. I do an 8-hour full day session. So most of the larger projects that I'm working on people for at least 8 hours.
Awesome.
And I'm probably on average doing that at least 4 days a week. That's kind of my goal. So I don't know what 8 times 4 is. But
I don't mean to pry. I'm just trying, you know how it is. There's a lot of, again, mostly just, some people for 8 hours means they're at the shop for, 8 hours and talking people out of getting tattooed for 6 of them, right? Other people are like, I tattoo for 6 hours, I do my prep for an hour, and then I do my post for an hour, and it's an 8-hour day. I'm just trying to figure out the pace now. Because you 30 years ago, it must have been, tattooing what came in through the door, but you were always very artsy. So like, how did that start off? What was that like 30 years ago when you were doing like, coming out of art school and going into tattooing?
It was rugged. I'll say that. So I went to art school I went to graduate school for fine art in Columbus, Ohio. And I had gotten my first tattoo from Brad Fink, who's in New York now. Yep. Brad Fink did my very first tattoo. But at the time, Brad was still in his very first year of tattooing at Trader Bob's Tattoo in St. Louis, Missouri. And like super old school kind of situation down there. And he wasn't known for anything in particular. I had a friend who'd been tattooed by him who set me up with a date there. But the idea of tattooing, like I didn't start getting interested in tattoos or tattooing when I was like 14, 15 and 16, like a lot of people did. I didn't really start knowing about tattooing until I was most of the way through college.
Oh, wow. Awesome.
I remember the book Modern Primitives had come out in 1989, and somebody handed me a copy of that book. And what's fascinating about that book in particular is that a lot of the tattoo artists that are presented in there were presented because they were doing really unusual, artsy kinds of non-traditional styles of work. And that was where I first saw tattooing as like, oh, as an art school kid, I was like, oh, there's a place for me there. There's a space that I can fit into there. Like, that's really fascinating. So just tattoo ideas, tattoo images work their way into my artwork. And then once I was wrapping up in graduate school, and people around me were like, you should be tattooing. You should be tattooing. I was like, okay, I guess I should try that. I got my first tattoo from Brad Fink, which was a small piece on my ribs. I decided in graduate school to have my second tattoo done. I had my entire back done in black work by a guy named Mike, who worked out of his basement with a Spalding and Rogers kit in Columbus, Ohio. And he basically spent a few days showing me how to set everything up and how to do things. And like, we got to be friends and pals. And he's like, yeah, you should really try this out. And that's what I started doing. I started tattooing out of my house really, really, really badly. But to get to the answer of your question, though, the one thing I realized at the time was that I knew I was tattooing really badly. I knew I had shitty equipment. I knew I didn't have the skills to do what I wanted to do. But I also had a sense that, if I just sort of applied kind of a sketchy, scribbly, kind of painterly approach to the way that I created these tattoos, that I could fake my way through it, that was what I thought at the time. And I did that for years. I was kind of known in my early years in the 90s, in the late 90s into the early 2000s, as doing this like really painterly kind of artistic style, and with lots of layering and depth and so forth. And 30 years later, I'm still doing that sort of thing. I'm just doing it with a much, I have a much better understanding of what I'm doing technically now than I did then, of course. But I still use the same kinds of ideas, like the textures that you see in these tattoos that you're bringing up, things like that. That was stuff I started doing early on. But early on, I was doing it to camouflage my shitty technique. Now I'm doing it to create better artwork.
And that's a little bit about what your seminar is going to be, right? Perfect segue, if I don't jump in myself.
Exactly.
So the seminar that you're planning on doing at Paradise has to do with the traditional rules and the new school rules, and just kind of, well, why don't you tell me? I don't know. Why don't you tell me a little bit about it? Tell us a little bit about it.
Well, so I'm going to be doing two things at Paradise. Apparently, I'm going to talk about I'm going to do what am I going to do? I don't know what you're calling
a discussion panel.
Discussion panel. Sorry. Thank you. I'm going to be doing a discussion panel that has to do with traditional tattooing versus modern tattooing. Sort of what are the traditional rules and why do we follow those, and how do we think in terms of breaking those rules, especially now in our modern age. Where did those rules even come from? That sort of thing. So that's kind of the discussion panel thing that I want to look at and look into. But my seminar, the seminar that I'm going to be teaching, is going to be more about it's definitely going to involve a lot of those same issues. But the seminar specifically is about how I translate my painting skills and my painting techniques and my painting ideas into my tattooing. And primarily what I'm going to be looking at and focusing on are cover-up tattoos, because I've been doing a ton of cover-up work over the last 20-some plus years as I've gotten better and better with my tattooing skills. And I've really come to realize that using an artistic, painterly, non-traditional approach to cover-ups is simply a lot more effective and offers a lot more options than the rigidity of traditional tattooing. So you're bringing up a bunch of images of various different cover-ups that I've done. And so, for example, one of the things that I'll be talking about has to do with using color over an old tattoo. Very often, artists will look at it, especially a traditionally minded artist is going to look at an old tattoo and say, well, we got to make that darker. There's that old yarn about, like, you just put a big black 8-ball on top of that old tattoo, and there it's gone, like it just disappears. Because I have a background in painting and I have an understanding of painting, I look at it more in terms of color mixing. And color mixing in a tattoo is not the same as color mixing in a painting. When you're doing a painting and you do a new layer, and we talk about this in tattooing all the time, like, well, I'm just going to put a layer of this on top of the old tattoo. In a painting, you're literally painting layer on top of layer on top of layer. With a tattoo, technically, all the ink and all the pigment that you're putting into the skin ends up living in the same layer of skin. So it's not on top of the old tattoo, it's mixed with the old tattoo. So if you said to an old-fashioned tattooist, like, well, what if I put yellow on top of this old black? A lot of tattooers are going to say, well, that's never going to work. But that's because they're thinking that if you put yellow on top of black, it's not going to heal up as a yellow. And that's true, it's not, because it's going to heal up as a mix of yellow and black. However, that mix of yellow and black is going to heal up to kind of like a, like a funky looking organic greenish kind of color. Well, what if you use that to create some like rough leafy goodness in that part of your tattoo? Like, you can use that mix of color to your advantage, as opposed to seeing it as like, oh, well, that'll never work. So in a simplified sort of way, that's the kind of thing that I'm going to be talking about, is how to use lighter colors over darker colors, how to use textures in your tattoo to kind of camouflage the old tattoo that's coming through. I have a special formula for the way that I mix my blacks in order to make a blacker black to cover up old black. How to look at negative spaces and take advantage of those when you're drawing and designing things. It all really requires. It really requires an ability to create the tattoo work and work on the tattoo off the cuff. And to sort of make decisions in the moment, as opposed to trying to completely and totally plan everything out ahead of time on paper, and I'll be talking about that part of it as well.
Awesome. Fantastic. These are great. And then you'll be painting, and you're not tattooing, you'll just be set up with your paintings and
No,
painting there.
I won't be tattooing anymore.
Awesome.
I stopped tattooing at tattoo conventions a long time ago because I simply found that it just isn't possible for me under tattoo convention circumstances to do the kind of work that I want to be able to do. That's my best work. Most of the work that I do in tattooing, even if I'm not doing cover-ups, so most of what I do in layers. I'll do a whole layer of black and gray, or maybe some color, and then let that heal, let that settle into the skin, come back and build another layer of color into that original color, and really just like create a fully finished piece of artwork. I rarely work in such a way that I sit down and bang out a complete tattoo from start to finish.
Sure.
Fitting.
Well, that's cool. So, but we definitely have space. So hopefully you'll bring a ton of your paintings, and I imagine that you have them for sale, or you have originals for sale. Do you take commissions? I guess I'm at the point now. Like, how do people get your artwork? How do people get tattooed by you? Are you accepting new clients? Are you only taking cover-ups? Done with cover-ups?
I'm pretty, my books are open at this point. I take all kinds of projects. Right now at this, there's always an ebb and flow. Right now at this moment, I'm pretty full through most of the fall and into the winter. But I only book, like I said, I only book things about 3 or 4 months in advance as far as tattoos go.
That's a great
of,
idea. Like when people book out for years, I'm always like, man, there's so many opportunities you're missing.
Well, there are, and also like I find that particularly as a parent, it makes my schedule it makes my own schedule much too inflexible. But it also becomes problematic. Like, let's say you have a client who booked an appointment and they waited a year or a year and a half to get in, and then the day finally arrives and some shit goes down with their car, some shit goes down with their kid or whatever. Suddenly they can't make that appointment. And you're going to ask them like, oh, well, fuck you, buddy. You got to wait another year and a half to wait in line to get back in. That's like, I don't want to have to do that to people. The other thing that I do, that I make sure that I do, especially because I do a lot of larger projects like sleeve projects and things like that. If I have someone that comes to me and says like, I want to start this project, and I'm like, okay, well, that's going to take 4 or 5 sittings. I'm going to try to make sure that I book that person's 4 or 5 sittings right then and there, so that they can come in consistently once a month and get the project finished, as long as that works for them and as long as that works for their time and their budget. I certainly have clients who go, oh, well, I can probably come in once every 2 months or once every 3 months. I'm like, okay, I can work with that. But I want you to have the opportunity to be able to get your project done, in a reasonable amount of time, as opposed to like having it take years and years and years to complete.
Sure, like my back piece 20 years later. This is a great Star Trek piece here. Is this you've got a decloaking? Is that what's happening? The ship's coming out of decloaking while getting attacked. Yeah,
so
amazing.
If you listen to the audio on the video,
battle in the sky.
Can you hear it?
USS Enterprise down here.
You can turn it off for now.
Yeah.
This is a piece that's I think it's 12 or 13 years old now. She came in. I was doing other work on her. But this is one of my all-time favorite tattoos that I've ever done. Obviously very, very painterly, obviously like super non-traditional. She has perfect, flawless skin to begin with, but she also brought me like the most spectacular, amazing reference material and so forth for this. But when I shot this video, I was so excited that I completely blundered. And I referred to the other ship as a Klingon ship, and it's not. It's a Romulan ship, and I got reamed. I got reamed by all the Trekkies for misgendering the attacking ship. But a really interesting story about this piece. So my friend Mike that works with me, he's started working with me about a year ago. He has a long history of being an illustrator and an artist for many, many years. I've known him for over 20 years. But about 5 or 6 years ago, he started an apprenticeship with someone else in the area who has a very strict sort of traditional background. And so and he worked at that shop for a few years in another shop that was pretty strictly traditional. He has a very, very intensely traditional mindset about tattooing. And he came to me, wanted to work with me because he felt too limited by that and wanted to expand out of that. And I'm like, I'm your guy. Let's do this. And so this woman shows up to get her new tattoo. I was like, Mike, you got to come in and check this out. And I was like, check this out. Look at that. And he's like, oh my God, that's amazing. That's crazy. Look how bright the yellows are, the oranges, whatever. And I was like, guess how old that is? He's like, oh, I have no idea. When did you do that? I'm like, that's 10 years old, dude. And
that's great.
And all of that sort of stuff. But then get this, the last thing out of his mouth, he's like, oh man, like at least you've got all the blacks in there to hold that together. And I was like, fuck you, dude. Like, you're just trying to rationalize this like traditional mentality. So he goes off and starts working on his thing. I spent the rest of the day working on the cover up on her chest. And as I was working on her other cover up project, I kept glancing over at this and I kept noticing things about it. And I realized in looking at this tattoo really closely that there's a few orange bursts in there that are absolutely perfectly, completely saturated. And so is the yellow and the whites, all the little itty bitty details in there. But you know what's really like really showing its age the most in that tattoo are the blacks. The outlines have gotten a lot more gray. The shading's just kind of a little blah. If this tattoo needs anything at all, it needs for me to go back and redo those blacks.
Hit it all again.
And I brought him back in, and I was like, hey, you know, what do you think about this? Like, what's holding up? What's not holding up? And he's like, oh, I don't know. Like this looks great. That looks great. Like maybe it needs a little bit of this. And I was like, what do you think about the black, dude? He's like, oh man, it really needs that. And I was like, no, dude, the black is the thing that it's actually the brighter colors. For whatever reason, in her skin, it's the brighter colors and the lighter colors that are more densely packed, that are more saturated, that are actually holding the design together. The blacks are the part that's actually softening more and more. I don't know if that has to do with the black pigment that I used on her at the time. Obviously, it was 10 years ago. Maybe it has to do with my particular technique. I'm not great at outlining, especially when I'm doing more painterly stuff. I don't think it ruins the tattoo in any way that stuff is softening. But
yeah, no, it's.
But it was fascinating to me to see this after so many years, especially where, part of the reason we've been having this conversation is that I've been seeing a whole lot more really young tattooers who have like 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 years experience in tattooing, and they all come up and they're like, oh, well, bold will hold, and you got to do this and you got to do that. And they've bought into this very rigid sort of traditional idea of what tattooing can and cannot be.
Mm-hmm.
And
well, that's one of the fun things about Doomshigs.
But they themselves don't have any experience being able to see the work that they've done and see what has and hasn't held up over time. I've seen plenty of tattoos that were done in the 50s, 60s, and 70s that look terrible 20, 30 years later, that are just an absolute blur. I don't think that any artist's drawing style will make or break whether or not your tattoo holds up. Technically, your tattooing technique and the quality of pigment that you're using and making sure that you're getting everything fully saturated is what really matters. And what really got me thinking about this was in the last few years, there've been a lot of studies done by people doing laser removal. They're trying to figure out why does tattoo ink hold up in the skin? What happens to that? And so I've read a handful of articles about how the macrophages in your skin sort of encapsulate these pigment particles, and they hold on to them, and that's what keeps the pigment particles in your skin. And I started to think about how that happens on a cellular level. Your skin cells are holding on to individual particles of pigment on a cellular level. Or they're not, one or the other. But those skin cells have no idea what color that pigment particle is, and they don't care. And they don't know what your drawing style is, and they don't care. And that is all of that is also a big part of what I'm going to be talking about in my my seminar, and where it's important to understand that in terms of doing cover-ups in particular, because it's important to understand that you have all of these pigment particles in the skin. They're all being held in the skin at the same level. You're not putting a new layer on top of an old layer. You're blending the new pigment into the old pigment. And that's where we've all seen lots and lots of images of cover-up tattoos where someone shows the old tattoo, and then they show their cover-up right when it was completely finished, and everything looks amazing, and they put all this white on top of all this old black and all this other stuff, and you're like, oh my God, I can't believe that covered that up. And of course you can't believe that. It's not believable because that photograph, which is taken immediately after the tattoo is completed, is just a lie. It's not true because in that case, like I said, you've got these layers of skin. When your tattoo is brand new and fresh, you have a solid layer, if it's done well, assuming you've got a solid layer of pigment that's going to remain permanently, that's injected in the layer below the surface of your skin. But the surface layer has an equally solid layer of pigment injected into it. And we all know that that's going to peel off during the healing process. So down here, you have this layer that's like a mix of black and white. Up here, you have a completely separate layer of solid white with no black in it. So of course, it's going to look really bright. But within a few weeks or a few months, that's going to peel away. And this is what you're going to be left with, is that mix of colors. So you have to really think about approaching the tattoo. You have to think about what your final healed, finished result is going to be, and not just think about what's going to look on camera, what's going to look best on camera today.
Yeah, no, it's awesome. It's a good spot to close on too, I think. Well, unless anybody else has any other topics, but yeah, no, I think it's exciting that you'll be able to be bringing your expertise both to the tattoo gathering, but also, thanks for hopping on the show here and for chatting with people for the last hour, the first hour there.
I'm really excited to get back to the Paradise Gathering. Like as I've said to you, I think it's one of the best things that's happened in tattooing. It's definitely the most artistic, most creative, most fine art focused program going out there. And I'm really excited to see it come back. I'm excited to be a part of it, and I'm really looking forward to doing these things there. And just
I appreciate you coming back too. I mean, yeah, I mean, there's everyone obviously was psyched to see you on the list, and it's fun because there's like a third of the gangs getting back together. There's like a third that have been like coming to the gathering since the 2008, 2009. Some of the Keystone shows, and now they're coming back to teach and to lead panels. And then we kept some spaces open so that there's fresh new blood coming in, and
there should be. There's always new people coming in.
Absolutely. Yeah. But it was fun. I mean, as you kind of remember, those first couple of years, I mean, the show's always kind of been able to sell out before we even opened it up. There's so few tattoo booths. And, but again, like I said, we've reset a little bit. Jake Meeks is coming in to help co-produce it from the Fireside Network.
Jake is great.
He's awesome. Did you do an interview with him yet, or?
No, I already did the interview with him. He posted it somewhere, and
fantastic.
That ended up being a really, really great interview. Like we had a really good long talk there. He just sent me the link to the finished edited version of it. I haven't gone back and looked at that. I need to figure out how to share that and reposted it myself. But it's out there in the world. And it was a great talk. I like Jake a lot. He's a really great guy.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And he's got, his YouTube channel's got 10 years of, awesome content. Well, I'll say 8 years of awesome content, 2 years of starter content. I remember.
That's to be expected with anything.
Absolutely. I just wanted to, I'm just giving him a little poke in the ribs there. And again, his channel's freaking great, and he's awesome. And he's got a real good, I'm just jealous. He's got a TV personality, and, but, awesome. Well, thanks again, Jackie and Ricky, for sticking it out and hopping on the Zoom calls. And so Chris, let's close off real solid. Let people know exactly how to get in contact with you. Your website, your Instagram, the studio, all that fun stuff.
So I don't currently have a website. I'm really just working off of social media. I can be found on Facebook. I can be found on Instagram. And it's really simple. All you need is my name, Chris Dingwell, Dingwell. There are very few Dingwells in the world right now, and so I'm really easy to find. You type my name in anywhere, you're going to get links to all of that sort of stuff. I'm in Portland, Maine. So that's where you can find me for tattooing. And you can, I'm open to letting people reach out to me however they feel best. I don't care if you reach out to me on Facebook Messenger or Instagram or any of those sorts of things. I don't have any like rigid rules about how to get a hold of me, you know.
Awesome.
So if you have any questions, I'm always here somewhere. I can
Perfect.
be a
And
little
if you're-
flaky. I can be a little
I was just
flaky
gonna-
when it comes
sorry,
to
yeah.
answering sometimes, but I'm here.
Awesome. And you started a small waiting list. I'm working feverishly on the schedule. I'll be working on it as soon as I get off of this, probably. But in the meantime, you said if people contact you directly, then they'll get the first crack at your tickets to the seminar.
Yes. Yeah. If anyone wants to jump into the seminar that I'm going to be teaching, Gabe is going to have all of the fine-tuned details posted really, really soon. And you can always go and sign up right there if you want to. But if you're interested, send me a message. Like I said, anywhere on Instagram, Facebook, what have you. Just make sure I get your name and number. And as soon as all of that gets posted, I'll send you guys a link to make sure that you get in right away.
Awesome. Wait, thanks again, everybody. I'm going to click the button and we'll catch up in the future.